good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are and what your time zone is. Welcome to DAM X DPC Unleashed. I want to start us off with a bit of context. One of the bits of context is I've never actually taught myself whether that should be pronounced X or whether it should be pronounced something else. We also use it for our own collaboration, so I really should have figured it out by now. The other bit of context is that I've been covering 3D and digital product creation as a key topic, probably my pet topic for most of my career in fashion technology, which spans more than 16 years. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Ben. I'm the editor-in-chief at The Interline. We're a tech publication for the fashion industry. We are free to read, so I encourage anybody to go check us out. We've also done a lot of work over the years of our own in digital product creation. And I've been involved in a lot of those kinds of projects as well. I remember working on the first deep dive analysis report that we ever put together on 3D, which I think was published back in 2015, and it was print. There's a print copy of it somewhere on a shelf, which I can get out for you, which probably gives you some idea of kind of where things stood there. But despite the disconnect between print publication and now everything being firmly digital first, back then, even in 2015, it was clear that designing, developing, simulating, visualizing, sampling, refining, and marketing fashion based on digital representations of products was where things were headed. It was a good idea, quote unquote. I've since had the opportunity to work on a lot of other projects under the DPC umbrella. As I said, our most recent DPC report came out just before the holidays last year. It's safe to say that a lot's changed over the course of more than a decade. A lot's changed in terms of how fashion thinks about 3D, narrowly and broadly. But in my experience, there's also been a consistent single vision behind all of this the entire time. Something that we at the Interline have referred to previously as like the holy grail for digital product creation, DPC. That holy grail is having the ability to make any creative, commercial, engineering, or buying decision based on a digital representation of a product without having to have the physical thing in front of you. That same promise has been at the heart of all of the big claims that have been made around 3D and DPC. Cutting samples, reducing impact, reducing time to market, streamlining downstream content creation through virtual photography, and plenty more. All of that anchors back in the same central idea. But as the title of today's event suggests, DPC, DAM X DPC Unleashed, that vision hasn't been fully realized. When we're using words like unleashed, we're clearly talking about something that's had the reins placed on it, something that's been in a cage, something that's fallen a bit short of its potential. So I want to start us off today by capturing that sentiment this way. If 3D is a strategic initiative, which I think most brands, small, medium-sized, big, would agree that it has been, then 3D assets have a strategic value, a significant strategic value. And the living relationship between those assets, or what's going to define the next stage of digital product creation, and the living relationship between all of the different pieces that make up those assets, is something that requires digital product creation to run in tandem with digital asset management, or DAM. Today, we're going to be covering that topic in two sessions. First up, we're going to have a presentation from one of the world's leading brand groups, someone who's been at the forefront of digital product creation for years. Then I'm going to get to chair a panel discussion where I get to quiz experts from across the landscape of DPC and DAM, including Ram from H&M. We're also going to be taking a short break between those sessions, so you'll have an opportunity to go get a drink, to make yourself comfortable before you come back. I'm here as a bit of a facilitator of these things. I'm going to be popping up to help link the two sessions and ideas together. I'm going to be asking my own questions in the panel discussion. I'm going to be maybe prodding the presenter a little bit as well. But if you have your own thoughts, attendees, listeners, if you have your own questions, your own opinions, like anything you want to get down as we go, then I'd encourage you to share those using the chat, or I think it's the chat panel that we have in front of us here. We'll aim to tackle as many of those questions as we can. It'll be up to me. I'll try and kind of bookend them and insert them at relevant points, but I want to make sure that we do get to everything, and I want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to share their perspective and to quiz the panel of experts that we have in front of us. To start our first session, I'm going to be handing over to Ram from H&M. If you spent any meaningful time in and around the digital product creation ecosystem and community, you probably recognize Ram's name or photo because he's one of the people that's been pushing the envelope of 3D and DPC forward within big brands, even if, as I think we're going to hear, those two acronyms, your DPC and your 3D, might not feel like the right way to describe the future scope for these kinds of strategies. I know Ram has a lot of thoughts on how digital asset management and how a different definition of what constitutes an asset can potentially connect the dots between different disciplines. And they can bring companies closer to that founding vision or that holy grail for digital product creation. Maybe they take them in a different direction entirely. I'm going to be listening pretty intently to this one. One of my former colleagues interviewed Ram for the Interline in the past, but I've never actually sat down with him one-on-one. So this is going to be instructive for me. And I'm going to pop back up at the end if I can and ask him a question or two of my own. But for now, please join me in welcoming Ram from H&M, and I will hand over.
Think it's time for me to switch on my video. So I
There
hope
you
you
go.
can see it. Let me actually also share my screen so we get the logistics in place before we can kick things off. Here we go. And this button. Perfect. Can I get a confirmation of, can we see the screen from somebody who's online?
We definitely can.
Perfect. Yeah, and thanks for the introduction, Ben. And yeah, I think usually for a while I have been covering DPC from the point of design. So I think this has been one of my first sessions where actually I'm also capturing from the perspective of digital asset management and how we want to approach the digital asset management per se, or how I see the DAM space going and expanding in the world. And one of the reasons when I was reached out by Brittany and the team was I started reflecting in terms of like, what is the purpose of a dam, especially in the evolution of AI and everything that's coming up there. And that's why I kind of made this deck called Why Dam Still Matters, because especially with the development of 3D versus AI and all this kind of dialogues and discussions going on, we shouldn't forget that this still is a core requirement in order to, no matter what digital product creation strategy we set going into the future. Um, so I want to kind of, most of my slides, when I want to share, I usually kind of start off with some kind of a disclaimer. So the story that I'm going to be sharing today does not represent the current state of H&M. So I'll be sharing some parts of it, some sneaks and everything. But this is also a general view of digital asset management. And if you are part of some brands, I think it's also important for you to understand in terms of like what parts of it connects to your business processes and priority, and kind of based on that, I would recommend you need to understand which parts to best use in terms of what direction you want to take going into the future. So with that said, the agenda for today that I plan to cover would be, I would like to start with just basic hello. Even Ben gave me a basic introduction to just to kind of step back and talk who am I and what I do in this space. Um, I want to go into something called the what factor, like what is a dam, and often we think dam from a specific angle. I want to kind of expand, and so that we're all on the same page when I'm representing the word dam, what does it mean actually behind it? So it's like the scope of what a dam is. Then obviously, usually I was kind of battling between should we start with the what and the why, or the why and the what? But one way or the other, I felt in this kind of presentation, maybe it's good to go with the why part afterwards. And the why here is more like the purpose behind why do we need a dam and what is the purpose behind it. Um, and then I wanted to touch upon some of the gaps that are often, when you think of getting a dam and when you want to implement a dam, you kind of find some couple of gaps in the processes that we often overlook or imagine that this is kind of solved, but it's kind of really not solved. And obviously, I want to touch upon in terms of like with the evolution of AI and everything, how do we see the evolution of dam and what impact would that create in that space? And last but not the least, just wrap up and mix with some conclusions and thoughts, some kind of takeaways that you guys can walk away from this presentation. So to start off with the first one, the hello. Um, so as I shared, like, so my name is Ram. I am a senior product manager, but also at H&M, but at the same time taking take a step back. I started my career in 3D and AI and architecture back in Milano in like 2013, 2014 almost. So it's been like a long time I've been in this space doing something around 3D and AI, but started with architecture. But my background is kind of also in the world of like business part, financial understanding, business models, business cases, and everything, and financial strategy also. At the same time, I'm also like having a decent background in design. I mean, I'm not a fashion design per se, but I do have a background in actually like designing and modeling and everything. But that also includes 3D skills. I also work with AI. I have a good understanding of technology landscapes. And I also worked previously for Adidas as part of the 3D implementation rendering pipeline teams to look at like how can we kind of scale footwear rendering pipelines at Adidas. And presently, as I said, I'm a senior product manager at H&M. I'm presently overseeing the product design space, so prints, products, patterns, and technologies around it. So it could be 2D technologies or 3D technologies or AI or including digital asset management that is needs for it. So that area of creative expression is where I'm primarily focused on within H&M landscape. So let's jump into the topic of the agenda of like the what is a dam. And I try to create this one pager to kind of explain the expansion, what the dam actually covers. So we often think from, especially as Ben mentioned, right, from the point of dam, from a point of 3D perspective, we often think from its digital fabrics, digital trims, its digital avatars. These are the things that we think about, but actually dam in the way I try to proceed, it's any kind of digital asset management. So it means it could be a print, it could be an all over print, it could be placement print, it could be in-house print, license print, bot prints. It could be like an avatars, like different even lasts. If you think of from footwear point of view and everything, and if you have like all your digital fabrics, but also not just the digital representation, but also the physical, the data points and attributes connected towards it, the buttons and the trims and avatars and those things. And obviously, then you also go into the world of products, which is like the finished product that you kind of have to think about how to work with it. Then you also need to think about the pattern, like the flat patterns from an apparel point of view. How do we need to manage it? Maybe for footwear and all of it, you also need to think about taking the sketches that are connected over there. Then you go into the world of guides. You also need to think about all the guides, the books, the guidelines that talks about how do you create a product. So DAM per se itself covers a major entity of an end-to-end perspective of what digital asset management asset types are. But not just this area, but also when you start including other aspects of it, is like you also need to think of how do you manage your work in progress, because it's not, especially in the design space, it's not like you just design and then you just upload everything and it's good to go. You're kind of constantly iterating and ideating in terms of like what do you want to achieve, what direction that you want to get out of it. And as you're working in the asset, you're kind of uploading it and then you have to download it back and then make a change to it and then re-upload it. So you have to think about the work in progress aspect of what digital asset management is. You also need to think about how do you manage a finished asset and the life cycle behind it. How do you archive it? How do you manage it? How long should you store it and why we should store it? Because finished assets, you also need to think from the point of licensing, IP rights, like longevity of a product that needs to be kept over there. And as I shared in the slide before, you also need to think about the design guides and frameworks, but also you need to think about the inspirational and mood boarding spaces, because you may get inspired by trends from TikTok and all of it, and you download all these assets. How do you kind of manage those assets behind it? So digital asset management is basically the overarching picture in terms of like those 2D assets, the 3D assets, the AI assets, whatever assets that you actually design and produce, and how do you actually manage them from end-to-end perspective. So once we understand the what scope, that becomes clear in terms of like the when you start thinking of the why part of why, what value does it actually generate. And I'm usually like try to give a basic high level purpose behind something before I go into the detail. And I was trying to find a very simplified language to explain that. And for me, the purpose is very simple, right? Especially as even in case of H&M and many of the brands, we make a lot of stuff. Just DAM is a place we make sure we don't lose it. We don't lose its identity and we don't lose the location, so we can actually go back. And one of the references that I often use within my own company sometimes is, in other words, is if you think of a physical space, so let's forget about the digital asset management, digital space. Take a physical space. Most of you who work in the brand will easily be able to recognize that you always aim to have a structured physical space library. You try to bring all your inspiration of all assets to ensure smooth sailing into the season. This is also a place where you have all your fabrics organized, you have your swatches, your physical books of swatches within the central library, as well as customer groups over there. And then you kind of with an ambition that anybody should be able to walk into that space and say that, hey, I want to find what I want to find, which fabric it could be, which some information about trends could be, or it could be about the buttons or the denim or what are the categories that you want to browse into it. You kind of always have the ambition that you want to get out of it when you actually have this physical library space. But usually, when you think of our digital library space, we often realize that these same assets are located in multiple locations across the organization. And often make this joke around with a couple of people in my team saying that imagine the same that we end up saying that if you want to find a fabrics, you go to this building. And if you want to find the colors, please go to this building across the street where you have to do it. And that is when the moment you put those thoughts into the place, you start realizing that doesn't actually make sense. But the world of digital libraries, we often feel like that is an acceptable norm because it is about just clicking into going to a new interface. But the effort is the same, the methodology is the same. So that creates a lack of discoverability in what you want to find. When you have multiple locations, it becomes harder for you to navigate to figure out where is what. You lose source of truth behind what you want to achieve. You heavily go towards dependency on memory. And as brands with seasons and seasons going on, you need to remember in terms of like when something happened, why it happened, or what decision was made for us to make that kind of an asset to be allocated in a specific place. You are kind of relying on the memory, and people leave the company, people keep moving around, and that makes it harder for us to actually maintain them and manage them. And often it also becomes harder to cross share because you often like don't do in a silo. You actually want to share with each other and work. That also becomes kind of harder in the way of working. So I often say that if the same ambition that we set when we talk about how to work in a physical space, I think we should start striving towards a similar ambition towards how we want to work in a digital space. But to kind of go down, because I also said I'm a fan of something more from a business directional point of view, strategical point of view, putting together some kind of a quantitative and a qualitative way of looking at it. Basically, from a quantitative angle, the ambition of a DAM or the why purpose is we want to reduce the amount of asset duplications because you may imagine that you are creating a floral print every season, but then when you start putting them into library and you realize that, oh, you made a floral print 2 years back, you start realizing like, why do I need to create a new one? Why can't I just use what I already created a couple of years back or what my colleague created a couple of years back? Then you have to think about lower storage costs because if you have multiple locations, you have to maintain them. You have multiple sources of truth that actually increases the cost of storages. So we have an opportunity to kind of streamline it and reduce overall storage costs. As I said about from asset duplication, but at the same time, you also have to be able to cut search time. So rather than navigating and remembering the name of the file, you are able to easily navigate and search and find what you want to find. You want to reduce the rework. As I said, if you find what you have already designed in the past, you can actually rework what needs to be generated. And you're able to increase the asset reuse rate. So you actually are able to cut down the lead time in what you wanted to generate. And the outcome, as I mentioned, is the accelerated time to market, where you're able to achieve from it. Then you go into from something a bit more qualitative because it's very hard to define what is the actual business gain you're getting because it's very soft value in a way. You kind of have a structure, so you create a single source of truth. You enable cross-team collaborations. You're able to preserve institutional knowledge because you're able to preserve the knowledge and able to go back and refer into it. And you're also able to something like what I like to call the creative exploration, where you are at the initial part of the season, you're not really sure what you want to do. So rather than spending so much of time in creating new assets, you can actually refer back and say that, okay, I have some inspirations I can start with. And that could be a good starting point in terms of like what you want to generate. I also see a lot of further enablers because this is often overseen that what I was kind of mentioning in the before was things that have more like a direct impact when you think from a dam perspective. But there are also this like the unexpected impacts that actually generate from it are the kind of this supporting impacts. So one of the things I'll be covering in today's deck is also like how it also helps you to future-proof yourself for the AI landscape. You also able to get an analytical view of the past because you're kind of preserving it and you can kind of think like, okay, how was the previous performance of this product, or the prints and everything. You're able to think analytical view there. You're able to maintain some kind of brand consistency behind how you want to operate, especially for brands that I want to target here that have a lot of brand identity, brand definition, brand values can actually come together quite well here. And you're also able to enable like end trend tracking across the seasons to understand how its behavior is going on, what an environment. So because this asset management gives you an observation on how the season is going, because of it gives you the one single asset management location where you can track back and observe the behaviors. And lastly, when you build in a smart way, you can also hook into your upstream and downstream systems. And then you actually generate the value that rather than manually uploading and downloading into the systems, you can actually kind of integrate it as part of the experience. So now we have a decent understanding in terms of the what is a dam, the why is a dam. I want to enter into the world of what kind of gaps do I foresee that people often kind of underestimate in terms of what it can actually do in this space. One of the pitfalls in the classical in the dam space is we often forget the importance of work in progress management. You mean, as I mentioned in the before slides, that the assets when you're actually working in, and how do you manage this back and forth? So for a work in progress, there are multiple entities that one has to consider in order to like, how do you need to proceed with DAM strategy? You need to think about how to handle when you have systems that are like on premise, and how do you handle like large files that has like no metadata or a remote access, how to manage them. Often, many companies either have OneDrives or SharePoints or those places for like it's good for collaboration because especially with a work in progress asset, you can just work on your computer and it kind of syncs into the cloud easily. So you don't need to bother too much in terms of like how do I need to upload or download or something. But it is kind of poor when it comes to like handling file formatting. It's also poor in terms of like searchability, findability, and all of them. Then there is also the whole idea of like established cloud digital asset management solutions that are out there, which is kind of amazing when it comes to finished assets because they have all these functionalities from filterings, from metadata management, searchability, and also like uploading and downloading functionalities. But the fact is, they have very limited understanding on how to handle work in progress support because one of the things that a lot of companies often say that we can easily sync it for you and allowing you to upload and download, or you can just upload it quickly. We have this functionality where you can just drag and drop it and stuff. But the problem that many people underestimate is if you take a print, if you do a really good print, usually they're 4K because you need to send a 4K print to your suppliers to produce a product. That 4K print can sometimes vary between 500 MB to it can go almost sometimes to a couple of GBs. Imagine that process of uploading and downloading and translation back and forth. That really spends too much of energy and the time for us to kind of wait for the process to happen. The same happens for 3D assets, like a good flow file. If you use the right fabric, if you do proper particle distancing, and if you actually generate the product with all the sewing and everything, then you also realize that file becomes quite hard. So work in progress management becomes kind of critical in terms of like which solution do you go to that should enable that way of working. And then you also need to think about the location where you're actually designing these assets, the design tools. Unlike many ones where if you work with like Word or PowerPoint and those kind of applications, you kind of can say that, hey, I'll upload into the DAM and I'll edit it in the DAM itself. But most of the design tools, if you work in the fashion space, you deal with like from a footwear point of view, maybe they're a bit more open source, like maybe you can work with Rhino and 3DX Max and all of them. But especially in the apparel sector, you have like Clo, you have like Browseware, you have Optitex, or you have Electromodaris, Gerber, Assist, and all of them. And they're not something that you can just upload into any solution and just open it in a cloud-based application and actually start working with it. That's what makes it a bit more complicated in terms of like how do you want to manage this space. And I think one also becomes critical is especially when you want to do work in progress management. Every designer or every individual or every department or section or something will needs to have their own space because you need to have individual space where you're working with your work in progress assets and a collaborative space of cross sharing for the final assets. And that also adds a layer of in terms of like license management and there is a user per cost model shifts. So you can go from a small group of librarians to licensing for the entire team. So you also need to think about the budget implications of change that changes fast, and you have to think about what is the scale of doing such kind of things. So one of the lessons we had to learn also at H&M is work in progress is not as easy as we imagine it to be. And we had to go through challenges to figure out like how do we actually proceed from all of this. The second, if you have been especially in the digital 3D space and everything, you should know about the multi-format management. So here we'll have to deal with multiple formats from 2Ds like PSDs to AIs to STIFF to SVGs to PDFs. You also need to think of GLBs, FBX, OBJ, U3Ms. Now you OpenUSD is coming out more and more. ZPRG formats over there, as well as like MDLs and different other formats from pattern point of view. As I'm covering here also, like you have to think of CAD and patterns like DXF, rule, and EBA, IBAs. You also need to think about the documentations. How do you need to manage it? So you also need to think about the challenges in terms of like, does it provide you the kind of the preview support that you need to have? One of the challenges I often see in the space is also that when they talk about 3D assets, they say that, yeah, we have a 3D viewer, but what you see inside something like Clo has a different rendering lighting. In same goes to browseware and all of them. The rendering, the lighting, the scene impacts in terms of what you're seeing in the tool versus what you see in tool outside, where it's not matching the same scene. And that can create a wrong decision where somebody can say like, oh, this is I think the product looks like, but then when they see on a separate and another interface, they'll say like, oh, this is not what the actual product is, and they may make a wrong decision to say like, I believe the right color is not here or the right fabric is not here, but that is not the reality of it. So I think we have to think about the preview supports. Then, as I said before, also like file size range, you cannot just think from a few KBs. You have to think about MBs and GBs. How do you ensure that we can have this kind of variable metadata for asset? Because your fabric will need a different metadata to a print, to a colorway, to a repeats. All these have variable changes there. You also need to consider the format of delivery, like in terms of like, can the DAM export the right format? So if you upload a Illustrator file, then you also want to be able to export the Illustrator file into a PNG or a JPEG or a TIFF or whatever. So you did, if you upload a 3D file, you also need to have a way of managing the renderings and the out and the export version of it, like the low resolution images and the low resolution 3D files. You need to think about all of it. So this is what makes it a bit more complicated in terms of like how we need to kind of observe what a critical nature of what a dam is, from it, especially from the design space. So now, kind of navigating into the hot topic within the design landscape is the AI impact. And here, I think one of the foundational issues that we are observing is the unstructured to a structured asset management, and how do we kind of plan quite smart in this space? Because maybe to give a bit of a context before I show the content, um, hypothetically, for a long time, when you had digital asset management solutions, maybe I can just show it. So for a long time, when you wanted to have digital asset management solutions, the problem was that your historical assets that you have been sitting in those libraries that you have been like not organized, not structured and everything, the worry always was like, how do we kind of structure them, or how do we get them from that library into the digital asset management solution? But then you realize that they don't have a structure behind it. It is just located in different applications. Even if you do find a structure, there is no metadata attributes. There is no information about whether it is a floral print, or if it is a apparel product, or if it is a t-shirt or a jersey or whatever. And then you need to kind of manually add in every single detail, every single nuances in order to kind of generate the respective product that you want to generate out of it. That kind of started to make it a lot more complicated in the past when you wanted to just kick off the dam and then able to leverage the historical assets. And so usually you end up like taking the time of starting new and saying that, okay, from now onwards, let's actually have a structure and let's work into it. But with the development of AI, we are seeing a shift in terms of how we can approach this whole space. So with AI, we can see that we can actually take historical patterns, historical prints, historical products, historical components like fabrics and all of that, and we can do an auto tagging, we can do visual classifications, we can do bulk metadata enrichment in a way that we don't need to spend the time that is needed, like in the past, if you want to reuse those historical assets, we are able to bring them all into the landscape much faster. And it is not just about the speed, even when it comes to the time, the cost it takes for us to doing it. In the past, the same effort would have taken like months of delivery. You could actually do it for a fraction of cost from working with AI generated assets and everything. Yes, you will not be able to maybe get all these assets. Maybe there are lost assets and it's too hard for us to pick everything. But often within my own team, I often tell them that it's better than nothing. So better than not picking anything from the past, even if I can pick like 60 to 70% of the assets for the past few years, that is a massive gain that I can generate for implementing DAM tomorrow. Rather than doing implementation of DAM now, and my ROI or return of investment and budgeting that I get out of this would take another few years. So this leverages that we can generate the ROI, return of investment, and the business gains, business value, business impact from day two on. And I think that becomes extremely critical in the direction that we're taking in the world of unstructured data to structured data going to the future. And I think this is where it gets interesting, as I said, right? The past seasons becomes searchable and archivable, not a graveyard. So you can leverage it from tomorrow onwards. But the catch that often as also referring to is like AI can get you like 670 to 80% there. But you still need to have a taxonomy and you have to have some kind of a human review on top of it. Um, we can't just punch it into AI and saying that generate all the metadata and push it to the system and we trust it. It will make those flaws, it makes those mistakes, it makes that kind of, especially I would say like if you have your own taxonomy. Many companies have their own color codes, as an example, or many companies have the name of the fabric is called differently from a known fabric point of view or reusability fabric point of view. So you have different naming conventions, naming methodologies. So you also need to consider that this is not a generic understanding, it's specific understanding. And based on it, you have to go through the process. I often also like mention that when we talk about even taxonomy, I usually categorize into three types. One is a taxonomy of a brand. So an AI or a human needs to understand what the brand taxonomy is, and based on it, make a change. Then you have a taxonomy that is a general understanding of a taxonomy is like it's a t-shirt. It's a t-shirt. And if it's a denim jacket, it's a denim jacket. Some things that we can kind of predict towards. But then the third category is the one which is kind of tricky, which is more about, I like to call it as fluffy or sometimes maybe subjective. That is the one where I can say that I'm wearing a Pokemon t-shirt. So somebody can look at it and saying that that is comics, and somebody can say that that is playful. Somebody can say that it is Pikachu. So it's a very fluffy in terms of what that is. That's more often also referred in the DAM language as like usually tags that we kind of give to a product. So you also need to consider in terms of tagging system and how do you actually adhere towards it and work towards it. The second entity that becomes important is with the development of AI is integrated experience. I think one of the shifts that we're going to see going in there is before DAM was a separate destination. So you go to the destination, you upload there, you download there. Designers usually switch between tools in the DAM constantly. If it's not convenient, people kind of skip it and then say that okay, I'll just go ahead and design it because it's too much of cumbersome work. But with the introduction of AI, we're also seeing the evolution of like RAG, AI embedding, letting designers pull from it DAM directly, searching suggestions, surface assets inside design tools or any other workspace without leaving the tool. So we are also seeing the observation like if let's give a classical example like in the past like when you wanted to search for something you usually go to Google search, you find it, you find through links and everything. But sometimes nowadays, what you guys do is you go to maybe cloud or you go to ChatGPT and you just type it there saying that, hey, find me an asset. It kind of browses through a list of options and comes back. Even if you do go to ChatGPT and if you have been doing image generation, you can also go there and search that, hey, I designed something like this in the past, and it just pulls up from the library and you actually can work with it. So it kind of creates this environment in which you actually can kind of easily put assets into the system and actually able to search, archive, retrieve. Even on your iPhone, when you actually like, just go back and just say that, hey, what was this? Like I usually, whenever I forget my passport link, I usually just search in my iPhone saying that passport, and then it just finds my passport image, and then I know this is the numbers I need to feed into my maybe visa application. So, but the catch again is that if you don't have kind of a structure and well tagging systems, AI can't do it. Like when you put good stuff in, you get good stuff out. So you also need to think about how do you manage that layer underneath it. And one of my favorite topics always is the financial modeling. And I think what's one of the shifts that we're also observing is that before DAM costs were quite simple, that it's a license fee, there is a storage, and maybe some integrated work on top of it. And but it is kind of also hard to measure ROI because nobody really can track like what a bad asset management actually costs. And that kind of become also a bit harder in the past that we say it's just a storage location and that people are using it. and we believe that people are using it when generating the value out of it. But now with all AI also, like I think we are seeing a shift in terms of like what kind of cost equations we will be seeing is shifting. We are seeing new variables coming through. We are seeing new savings and new budget conversations. So we're talking into it. We're kind of going towards like a per user versus storage base. Sometimes we also talk about per call cost model. So when somebody says that, oh, okay, the asset management is there, but every time you want to search, you ask for some kind of a search. Every search costs a token, and that cost into it. And that also makes it very interesting is because you're tracking some of those analyticals behind it, you're also able to understand the burn rate with increased adoption. So we can say that, okay, the more people are using it, the more adoption rate is connected towards it. So it also becomes interesting in the development of AI and everything about like what kind of financial modeling we will see here, financial directions you're going to see here, and kind of evolve from there going into the future. So before I go forward into it, I always like to give a quick sneak. Um, so I'm going to give a quick sneak peek in terms of a asset management solution that we presently are working within H&M landscape, and that gives you a sense of like some of the things that I've shared so far are not completely theoretical. Some are actually something that we have actually been implementing it, and we are seeing the results coming out. Um, like, so this is a quick sneak peek of a digital asset management we have within H&M landscape where we are managing all our print assets. So you can see like all our placement print, all our prints, graphical prints. We have like the whole women's wear assets here. We have print tags, we have licensed items behind it. And you can also search for like a tiger print and then it finds the patterns of tiger and everything. You can search for like a floral print or a floral green in this case. So you're kind of being more specific in the categories that you're looking for, and you can browse it through. And then you can say, okay, I found a floral green, but I want an abstract version of it. And then you can also start getting some abstract view. And it is not a place for it is not just a place for managing your uh, final assets, but also is a place where we're managing the artworks that we generated for it, the colorways behind it. So allowing the designers to kind of go into the historical prints and then find maybe a color that they're inspired by or a category that they were inspired by, and they're able to like download it. But we also are looking into how to book the prints and everything. So that allows us that anybody of a specific customer group wants to kind of, maybe I can just take a step back there. So this also allows a customer groups where they can say that, okay, I want to be able to go back to my existing print over there, and then actually like I want to book it because maybe it's from women's wear or from kids, and then I want to say which season I want to use it. So it allows us to kind of have that kind of transparency in terms of like cross sharing, cross collaboration, and everything established. But then you also can email people the print that they want to kind of talk about or discuss about it, and you can share within this specific landscape and how you want to operate. So when we kind of achieve this one out, also what we have observed is a couple of outcomes that we're able to generate from all of this is we were, I think so far we are migrated over 50,000, around 40, 50,000 prints have been migrated. Print assets, which means not just the file, the print file, but also all the subsequent files, the images and the JPEGs and everything, as well as artworks. And what we have understood is when we want to migrate them, we thought it'll take forever to do without AI powered attributes. So we actually put it through GPT, and then we actually generated all these attributes rather than going through each one by one. And we have, I think, generated around like 10, 15 attributes per print, and then we actually chunked it through the pipeline. Uh, we already released to an entire women's wear team, and we are planning of release to other customer groups. And we are migrating assets already from SharePoints by the end of the season that as they start going to the thing. But this is one classical example that I like to give to people about it is I can kind of way of putting it as that it's H&M's like one-stop print library where you can find a mermaid print. And maybe here, if I could zoom in and see that there is a mermaid here, but this is not tagged on a print. So we actually had to process it through AI, and the AI actually has found the specific print, and then it was like, okay, this is actually was existing for you to pick it up, and then people could just search for it, and then actually just find the print and work with it. And then when you start imagining the amount of prints we create per season by season within H&M across the landscape, this becomes quite powerful in terms of like able to reuse prints for different purposes and different reasons across the organization. So as I come to kind of closing up this one, um, I was kind of given the time that I can have like around 50, 55 minutes, but usually I like to close at least 5, 10 minutes before because it gives room for questions. But also, a lot of information from a monologue can be kind of overwhelming. So I try to close sooner than later. So to close up into the thoughts, this will be very I was thinking from the last couple of days about how do I close these thoughts, and I was like, maybe I'll give a different approach in what should be done. Um, I think my recommendation goes down to is like if you want to think of DAM and digital asset management, and if you understand that this is what you want to do, you need to define a clear purpose and the people and the tech and the roles that you want to define. You also need to define a very clear purpose. And this is often I talk about, right? Because if you have seen the presentation, you've understood it covers multiple entities from prints assets to 3D assets to final product assets, guides, guidelines, and everything. It talks about cross sharing between different roles and everything, between a print, product, and patterns. It talks about how do we kind of manage in terms of like searchability, findability, and all of this kind of functionalities. So you need to start thinking about like what is your overall scope in terms of what you want to achieve. You need to think about your present as is. How are you presently working? You need to define your to be, but the to be could be like this big scope, what you want to do. Often we get excited about the to be, but we forget the transition states in order to achieve the to be. Maybe you realize that either your to be should be the everything that has been constellated in terms of what a dam should do in the DPC space. But then you realize that, okay, maybe I'll start with prints or I'll start with products, I'll start with patterns. And then you kind of scale from there on in terms of what you want to achieve. And also, notoriously, for a long time, a lot of people can think that, okay, I'll have one damn solution can do all my problem solving. Not really. It doesn't need to be one solution for everything. You can also have a dam for this kind of assets, that assets, that assets. But then, moment you create multiple solutions, you also need to think about experience of how you're going to move between the applications and stuff. But you don't need to be confined to the idea that everything has to be in one place. And most importantly, also that from an overall design landscape, you also need to consider that to differentiate between digital asset management versus application. Often we have feeling that a digital asset management means it cannot be in a PLM system. No, not really. PLM system can have a PLM solution can have some functionalities of DAM, but one doesn't mean the other in terms of what it is. So you need to think about your entire design end-to-end landscape. You need to think from an experience point of view what you want to generate. You also need to identify places where you'll compromise. As I shared so far, some dams will adhere to work in progress. Some dams will may not adhere to work in progress. Is that important for you? Is it not important for you? So you need to identify those compromises and to be transparent in your communications to say like, okay, these areas where we get benefits, these areas we won't get benefits. So you can define what is your key areas of focus where you target the most. Then you also need to identify in terms of like the cost to value objective and honest review and effort to not just implementing the dam, but also effort to migrate as well as maintain the solution. That is often needs to be considered that once you put a dam, it's sometimes you have to kind of maintain it, you have to upgrade it. You maybe, let's say that you migrated all your prints like the way we did. And then after a couple of years, we realized that, oh, wait, actually we're missing all these attributes. Then somebody has to go and automatically upgrade all those attributes in those systems. Otherwise, it's not relevant anymore. So you need to think about this whole plan in terms of like, how do you manage them? How do you migrate them? How do you maintain them? And then also you need to think about the cost to value objective to say like, okay, how much am I investing now and how much quickly I can generate the value. And obviously you have to identify the partner that hits all present and also direction fits into the future. So maybe you found a really good partner, a solution that says that, okay, out of your 20 requirements, I'm able to do 10 of them now. But then if you look at like companies, then you can say that, okay, is it in best benefit of that company to add the 10 more requirements going into the future? Maybe if you get a dam that is more fashion or product focus, they may achieve. But if you can get a generic dam out there, maybe they'll be like, oh, we will not make an MDL file available for you because it's a fashion specific problem you need to think about. So you need to think about all these equations in terms of like the direction that you want to take and the approach you want to take going into the future. So I want to kind of close it up here. I think I spent like maybe 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes, hopefully there. And I want to come kind of wrap it up here to say like, yeah, thank you for listening to me for like 35, 40 minutes. That's a long time.
Mhm.
And if there are any questions or thoughts, I'll be picking
Well,
it up now.
there are, and I'm gonna try and be a bit of a kind of intermediary between some of them. So I'll pick these in preferential order, I think, of how quickly we can get through them. Annie asks, is there a place or forum that you're watching to keep up to date on 3D technology? Selfishly, you might want to read the DPC reports from the Interline, but I'm sure Ram has his own ideas.
I mean, to be honest, Interline is one of my go-to things. And I think every year when Interline report comes, I do spend my time reading into the Interline reports and everything. And actually, recently there was somebody who asked me that, well, how do you follow up? And I actually said Interline, and I gave them Interline website to follow up into it. So not saying because Ben is there, just saying because that is a good source. Or 3D RC is usually good plus spot
PRC is nice,
what
yeah.
those guys are doing in that space. And also PA Apparel, they do drop a lot of videos on YouTube. So usually I refer to that space. I would say right now to catch up, these are my three sources. Otherwise, I would say just networking and understanding with colleagues and friends to understand how the space is moving.
Fantastic. Then Ray asks something that I was going to kind of ask a little bit. So the question that I had in mind as you were going around was around, you mentioned design as a continuous process. It's also like a multi-stakeholder process. And it seems like as part of that, we're really extending the audience and the user base for digital product creation, if you want to call it that, to basically everyone. There are people who would use DAM as a destination that you mentioned, and then there's a vast pool of people who need to query that destination from a bunch of different other kind of repositories and for different reasons. I was going to ask, what do you think it looks like to onboard that wider community? But Ray asks, headless versus interactive DAM. And I think that's basically a very similar thing, which is you either sit down and you use the tool in a traditional seat, or you have access to the capabilities of it elsewhere. I think this whole headless versus full seat technology question is fascinating. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I mean, I believe, at least for foreseeable future, both worlds will coexist. And the reason being is if you talk about something headless as a dam, but you're still having an experience where you're kind of navigating. But usually, headless experience is where you kind of know what you want to find. So if you say that I want to find a floral print, then you kind of talk into something and then it finds you the floral print, you navigate into it. Whereas an experience like a searchability experience, the classical approaches usually can be used for when you want to be more creative. When you're like, I'm not really sure if I want a floral print, I'm not really sure what I want. There you're kind of like browsing and navigating in terms of what you want to find. So I think both have their own purposes in terms of where in process you are and where in terms of what you want to find. So I go to both worlds based on how I want to navigate. So for example, let's take ChatGPT in that space where I browse through and I'm like, okay, what did I do in the past? So I like to just browse through my iPhone photos or my ChatGPT photos to say like what I did. That is not headless for me. That is just classical navigation. But then if I feel like, oh, I want to find my passport thing on my phone, then I just type passport and I find it. So they have the purposes. And I think as a thing, you need to understand what is more important for you in the brand and what is the ambition that you want to achieve out of it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Another question comes from Randy, which is, how do you work with your DAM vendor to ensure that development for 3D viewers keeps pace with all the different file formats?
That's a bottleneck. That's where we have to work with the vendors. I don't think so. Anybody has hit the solution that fits into it. Some companies come and say that I solved it for maybe for Clo, I solved it for this one. But then, especially for a company like us where we have like apparel, footwear, home, and all of it, so we cannot think like, oh, it works for Clo, but not for this. So actually, we have not yet solved that problem in terms of it. Few companies like Vantan and all of them have been approaching from an embedding point of view, where they want to embed a 3D viewer into the existing landscapes. But again, it's also evolving field where OpenUSD is just coming out now. We're trying to figure out over there. So I don't think so we have nailed the approach yet.
Okay, that's fine. That makes sense. James has something to add to your definition of headless, which is headless equals find out what they call it and then search for it, which I think is an interesting take because it gets to the difference between the structured and the unstructured stuff you talked about, which is to say you can have formalized labeling and data hierarchies and schemas and things that everybody kind of knows and that they operate under, but that to an external headless type of user, it's opaque to them and they're having to guess at the taxonomy and everything that's in place. I am imagining this is where you see AI coming in from like a semantic search and natural language and fuzzy search kind of perspective.
I agree, and also I think sometimes it can also be kind of like stressful and also like exhausting. Like for example, okay, you do have this kind of semantic search and all of it, and people feel excited about it, and then imagine you search for it and you got like top four results, and you're like, that's not what I want. I want my top 10 results, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna search again. I'm gonna search again. So again, I think we should not underestimate the importance of like classical navigation versus this. And often it can get exciting, but after like a couple of times, you can get very exhausted very quickly in this process.
Mhm. Perfect. Okay, question from Douglas. So he used to work at Oakley, the sunglasses company, and when he was there, the product design teams were storing work in progress, sorry, design files in PLM. It was the system they were the most comfortable working in, so it was the most logical one for them. Do you find your product designers are happy working in DAM for work in process? Why do I keep saying process? Work in progress file management. And how do you see the benefits of DAM versus PLM for that kind of thing? This Douglas has his own thoughts, but he's keen to hear yours.
Again, I think we have to define between a PLM is lifecycle management, damage resilience management. Maybe there is a PLM out there that does a maybe let's say Centric or Flex or Bamburos or whatever that has the capability of doing both PLM and DAM. So it can have asset management within the PLM landscape. So it doesn't mean that it has a DAM has to be a separate solution, not within PLM landscape. So if as a company found that they can work with the digital asset management and what capabilities that they need within a PLM system fits, great for them. I don't recommend that you should go out for the reason of it. But again, going to work in progress assets, often the problem is I have not found a PLM system that can say that I can easily download and upload like a 1 GB files or 500 MB files easily back and forth without the cumbersome processes behind the whole thing. The only one that is right now that works very well is classical SharePoints and OneDrives and everything. There are few options from Adobe when they have like creative clouds and everything of way of working, but that does fix some problems, but doesn't fix the asset management problems over there. So that is also like one of I like the way you said before, also like one of the holy grail problems in the DAM. And for me, the holy grail problem of DAM is work in progress management. Is kind of
Mhm.
the under problem that we often have that we need to figure out how to solve.
Well, I think you might have answered our final question from the audience, which is from Pamela, which was saying, have you implemented workflows in DAM to manage in progress assets? And if so, can you tell us what the process was like and have you faced any challenges?
As of now, no, because we realize that when it comes to work in progress, we let them work in SharePoints and work into it. Because also the timelines are different, workflows are different. If you work with, especially in again fashion space, if you work with suppliers, it's different to how you would do designs internally is different. So I think right now any processes establishing on work in progress, at least we are seeing that it more it may solve the data issue and we can say that oh we have more data foundations and data strategy, but it actually increasing the overall lead time for design in this process. So we are not seeing that in an overarching impact that we need to generate, this is not actually
Mhm.
solving the problem yet. We are observing, we are looking into this space, but we don't have an established process. But again, if you go into other sectors like marketing and other areas, you have like again, Adobe has something called Workfront as a solution that you can actually manage behind it. So there are ones, but again, in our landscape with multiple asset types from prints and products and patterns, with multiple kind of seasons, multiple product types, we haven't found something that fits like all the checkpoints where we feel like, yeah, this is the way we want to approach it. So we're still looking into it, we're still observing, but we have not nailed it.
Okay. And final question from me without giving away any trade secrets. You mentioned this is not the current state. What do you think is the timeline here?
I mean, what I showed is the current state, the one of the videos about what we're doing. I think our plan is to continue to observe in terms of other DAM assets like patterns or prints or products and like other categories like even SharePoints and all of it. But I cannot reveal a lot more than that because those other states are as a work in progress from our side. So I cannot share the work in progress ideas. Maybe next year I can come back and share what is the current state of the next year into this space, but cannot reveal too much more than that.